Hey, what's up, Swits? This is actually part 2 of a 3-part video. This video assumes that you already know how to play Tribute and understand the basics of play. If you need an explanation of the game itself, click this video here to go back to part 1 where I explain how the game is played. With that out of the way, welcome back to my TED Talk on all things Tribute. For part 2, we'll be discussing my general preferred strategies that got me up to Rubedite rank, starting with the simple act of deck selection. My ideal 4-deck setup is purple, red, orange, and green. I consider purple and red to be primary decks. I always make sure to have at least one of these in play, as they're what largely control the game. Orange and green I call flex decks. They have great secondary buys to supplement our primary buys, and great patron powers that synergize with our strategy. If you don't have these secondary decks yet, no worries, we'll be talking about strategies for every deck in the game. If I'm going first, I'll often pick the orange deck as my first pick. A lot of players still don't have access to it yet, and it's unlikely to get picked by our opponent. We'll have to be reactionary for our secondary deck pick. If our opponent picked at least one primary deck for us, we can grab one of our secondary flex decks. In this case, I'll pick green. If our opponent didn't pick either of the primary decks, we'll need to grab red, or risk a very slow and grindy game. If we're going second, our pick is going to be a lot more reactionary based. If our opponent grabbed one of our primary decks in their first pick, we can grab both of our flex decks, as it's unlikely our opponent is going to choose them. If our opponent didn't grab either one of our primaries as their first pick, I'll grab orange and red, as that at least makes up the core of our strategy. Don't worry if you don't have the orange and green decks, I also consider yellow and blue to be flex decks, and I'll cover strategies for them as well. Now, playing Tribute is a delicate game of resource management. You generally want to stick to 1 or 2 suits of cards and effectively use their patron abilities as well. Our main strategy will revolve around building an engine around either the red or purple decks. Red is generally more powerful than purple, but also a lot more expensive to get up and rolling. I mentioned in the last video that the player going second gets an extra coin at the start of their first turn. This can critically let you buy some power play pieces very early in the game. Don't overlook how good this benefit is. Understand that deck building games are a game of odds. When we start the game, we have very few cards. As a result, this means that any cards that we buy early in the game will appear more frequently for us as they're shuffled back into the deck more often. A lot of newer players make the mistake of utilizing the treasury too much in the early turns. While this is a good play if you have 2 gold to burn, don't let this distract you from buying early combo pieces for your engine. Buying our combo pieces is our #1 priority in Tribute. If you have access to them, a great early game play is to utilize the patron powers of the green and orange decks. Getting early access to the green patron requires us to have both the green and red basic cards to get ourselves 2 power in order to trigger him. Alternatively, we can buy the Battle Meditation action card to generate some early power to trigger his effect. The green deck patron will give us an extra gold every turn, which might not seem like much, but it really does add up, and often opponents forget about it or don't notice that you're benefiting from it. Alternatively, the orange deck patron allows us to put a curse in our opponent's deck for the low price of 3 gold. This useless card wastes one of our opponent's precious card draws. Getting this in early can mean that our opponent will draw it very frequently, as it keeps getting reshuffled back into their deck. You can easily delete a curse with the treasury, but it's guaranteed to waste one of our opponent's draws and some gold, and also it initiates what we call in the fighting game community a knowledge check. When our opponent does inevitably draw into a curse card, it's imperative that we watch their turn very carefully. If they delete the card with the treasury, we know that they know how to deal with curses, and should still use it, but primarily only when we have the coins to spare. However, if our opponent doesn't use the treasury to delete the curse, it's time to start spamming them whenever possible, as it will absolutely cripple their later draws. Again, if they are deleting them frequently, we don't want to make this our chief strategy. A lot of new players will get to use the orange patron for the first time and make an effort to trigger him every single turn. If your opponent is deleting the curse every single turn, you're actually coming out behind them in the end, so don't just feed your opponent coins for no reason. A common mistake a lot of new players make is overlooking the power of the neutral cards in Tribute. Rag Picker is one of the single most powerful cards in the game at only 3 coins. Being able to delete one of your basic coin cards is often more powerful than using the treasury, as it will allow you to set up big combo plays later in the game. This is another reason why I like to utilize the orange deck, as Moonlit Illusion essentially operates the exact same way. Barterer and Harvest Season are both decent cards and cheap ways to find other potential buys for your deck from the tavern. Be careful when using these cards. Sometimes I notice new players buying these with their last couple gold just to get a new card in the tavern, only to then give their opponent an essential combo piece that they have no way of getting rid of right before that player's new turn. Barterer in particular is great for denying your opponent their combo pieces. Just make sure you're only using these if you have the capital to make an investment right after. If you don't have any funds to refresh the table, you're better off spending your gold on the treasury to give yourself more gold in the future. Moving into the mid game, your first priority will always be buying your combo pieces, but feel free to pick up some flex pieces from the other flex decks. Yellow deck cards are often worth a large amount of gold to help you buy your combo pieces and can easily be deleted later with the use of the yellow deck Patron power to stop them from interrupting your combos in the late game. Green deck cards often don't need any combo parts at all to be effective and can offer you decent power in the early to mid game. Blue is the deck I still generally feel is the weakest of the bunch but can offer you some flexibility in stacking up powerful combos. Lastly, the orange deck offers a ton of agents, who will likely be active on the field and not in your deck, while being great progress blockers for your opponent due to how low their cost is and their access to taunt. Let's take a quick minute and talk about the remaining patron powers and how to use them effectively. The red patron power is very strong in the late game. If you manage to buy one of the very expensive 9 cost agents, try and find a way to also access 2 power to immediately bring it back to the top of your deck. The blue patron is a great flex power to have access to, as it lets you delete very powerful high health agents from your opponent or get around agents protected by another agent with taunt. Lastly, the purple patron is a very effective gold to power converter, but you need to be aware of when to use it, as it's locked off from use if the patron favors you, meaning you won't be able to use it again until your opponent does. I generally only use the purple patron when I have around 10 or more gold and nothing to spend it on, or if I'm trying to threaten an opponent with a patron win. Speaking of, threatening a patron win is a very powerful strategy. You shouldn't generally go out of your way to make all the patrons favor you, as a patron win is generally pretty unlikely. However, I spoke in part 1 about how good an idea it is to put your opponent in a state of patron check, meaning that you have 3 patrons favoring you. This is a great plan that forces your opponent to make suboptimal plays, such as cashing out with the purple patron for low return, or using the orange patron and losing 3 gold to it every single turn. There is another benefit to putting your opponent in patron check, however, and that's for utilizing one of the secret most powerful cards in the game. Tithe is an enormously dangerous card that most players never even think about. You see, most players are fully willing to sit in a state of patron check, comfortable in the knowledge that as long as they activate 1 patron each turn, they can still win. However, a tithe drop off the top of the table can suddenly turn that patron check into a confirmed win. One of my favorite moments playing Tribute so far was a game where I was severely behind my opponent. While they confidently continued to gain power from combos, I desperately swapped out cards in the middle of the table using cards like Barterer, until like a light from the heavens, I finally managed to pull a tithe. After using it, I activated 2 patrons in the same turn and completely stole the game from them. Do not sleep on how dangerous this card can be in the endgame, and be very afraid of it if your opponent is nearing a patron win. Lastly, we'll talk about the ability to do what's called hate drafting. Magic players might be familiar with this term, but it's essentially drafting cards that you know your opponent is trying to utilize. For example, if your opponent is building red cards and you have a turn with a ton of cash and see a banneret hit the table, you should take the opportunity to buy this card if you don't have an equally devastating card to pick up for your own engine. Expensive cards like banneret are usually very powerful on their own and potentially game-ending in the hands of an established engine. For the record, no, I don't know how to pronounce that. And if you're already typing a comment about how I got it wrong, just know, I don't care. Playing around your opponent's game plan is a huge part of the game as well. That about covers it for what I can teach you from my early experiences playing Tribute so far. If I can give you one final piece of advice, keep in mind that you can't win every game. It is possible to commit no errors and still lose. At the end of the day, Tribute is a game about making the best of what the deck gives you. There are going to be games where your opponent gets their engine online faster than you with no chance to interact on your end. Don't be discouraged when this happens. After all, it's a game and you're supposed to be having fun. Also keep in mind that this game is still very much in its infancy. What worked for me might not work for you as the meta develops. I'm just recounting what's worked for me so far. I fully expect a couple of blue players that have already written a 300-word essay about how it's actually the best deck and I'm an idiot for thinking otherwise to be in the comments. I can only speak about what's worked for me so far, and I'd love to hear about what's been working for you in the comments below. But we're still not done yet. I've got one more video coming out where I'm going to be playing live games and doing live commentary to help you out further. I still plan to do one more video covering the final 2 decks once I've unlocked those as well. One final note for everybody in the Tamriel Trade Secrets Discord who encouraged me to make this video is absolutely for you guys, you're all legends. So I hope you guys stick it out for one more video and I'll see you in the next one.